សូមអញ្ជើញលោកអ្នកនាងចុច like ឬចុច subscribe ដើម្បីទទួលបានព័ត៌មានថ្មីទាន់ហេតុការណ៍និងទស្សនាវីដេអូផ្សេងៗទៀតបានគ្រប់ពេលវេលា
Do we hope that the new administration, whether the incumbent or President Trump, suppose that he's going to be re-elected, or the new President Joe Biden, do we hope that the new administration in the next 4 years would change U.S. policy toward Cambodia to some extent?
Yes.
From the current status quo.
What we hope for is, first of all, I hope it is President Biden. But even if it's the incumbent is reelected, what we've seen is the lack of support for our own institutions. And so the U.S. State Department, which really, and our consulates, who are really the front line of defending of democracy, have really been weakened tremendously over the last 4 years. So we are hoping, first of all, I know it will happen if President Biden is elected, and I'm hoping that Trump, if it happens to be that Trump is reelected, that he will understand that the way we defend democracy is by supporting those institutions like the State Department, which promote democracy, which defend freedom, which stand up and represent the United States. We have a much smaller State Department, and that's the first step. It's much easier to engage in sanctions when we have a strong, robust State Department that engages in diplomacy. We're not engaging in diplomacy with Hun Sen. We have a weakened foreign affairs, and so we have to do that. Hun Sen has to hear on a regular basis from our own State Department, from our own administration, and I'm hoping that will happen. I know it will happen under President Biden. I know if he is elected, that he will strengthen the institutions of the United States, and one of them is our State Department, and that will help us promote democracy and be able to have our own people on the ground standing up to and watching what's happening to Hun Sen and then reporting back to the Congress. And also, I think there'll be a closer relationship in the future if President Biden, if it becomes between the administration and the Congress. Many of us on a bipartisan way in Congress have spoken out against autocracy in the Congress, but it doesn't seem to be a high priority of this administration. Although they are opposed to issues of China, but we're really not watching. There's been less attention played to the loss of democracy. And we need a new administration that does that pays much more attention to this, and that supports the rights of people to dissent, to speak out, where we've seen in our own country that as a candidate, Mr. Biden is supportive of peaceful demonstrations. He is not violence, but peaceful demonstrations, while this present administration tends to see them all as looters and bad people. Well, there are some looters and they should be arrested, but the vast majority of them are not looters. And I think that's true throughout the world. The demonstrations that we're seeing in Cambodia are peaceful, and it's time for the American government to recognize that and pay attention to that. Just like it's time to pay attention to people who are demanding change in the United States.
Real quick, we have a question from our listeners and viewers, our audience, asking, the government of Cambodia accuses the student movement for democracy based in the United States as a rebel group, while they demand the release of peaceful activists, protesters in Cambodia. Do you think this group is a rebel group that should be outlawed?
Of course they're not a rebel group. All the evidence, the United Nations, which is on the ground, the international community that's really paying attention, sees these are peaceful demonstrations. These are people who in Cambodia who are fighting for environmental justice, who just wants to alert the government, who just want to speak out. These are singers and rappers who are just presenting their music. They're not trying to overthrow. They're not violent people. The violence is occurring from the government by arresting people, by going into their invading their offices. The violence is coming from the government. The people who are demonstrating are just exercising their constitutional rights to speak out. That's what democracy is all about. And the government, by blaming them, is trying to take the attention off that. And the people of Cambodia know that. They know that these demonstrations and these folks are peaceful. These are human rights activists, people who are fighting for human rights, and they're being arrested. They're not violent people. The violence is coming from the government.
Yeah. One last question. I keep saying last question, but I keep getting more questions from our listeners and viewers. You and your colleagues in the House from both sides of the aisles have introduced a number of bipartisan resolutions and bills to try to bring real democracy back to the Cambodian people. One of them you sponsored back in 2017. 2017 is H.R. 661. That was passed. From your vantage point, can Congress push for more actions after a resolution was passed?
Absolutely, and I think it reflects that we right now we're doing a piecemeal approach in Congress. We're reacting to individual actions, but what we need is a new administration, which will happen hopefully in the next 2 months. And if it's the president incumbency, which is not the one I favor, but if they are reelected, for the president to realize that the role of the United States is to stand up for democracy and to pass legislation that supports democracy and is against autocratic rule. We have to change our attention and our focus in this nation to support democracy. We've done, after many incidents occur, we pass or we introduce legislation, but we don't have a focused attention that the United States' role is to be the diplomatic leader of the world, promoting democracy and fairness and the right to dissent and the right to people to demonstrate and to ask their government to respond to them. That's what democracy is all about, that the will of the people must be addressed. It's not about the will of the leaders. But in autocratic governments, like now Hun Sen, it's the will of the government that is protected against the people. And the United States, in general, is not doing enough to promote democracy throughout the world. And I'm hoping that whichever administration is, but I especially believe that it would happen under the Biden administration, that we will again join with those other democratic countries throughout the world to promote democracy. And then we will pass this. We will pass sanctions. But we've seen, not just in Cambodia, we have seen this administration not wanting to join other nations, whether it's dealing with Iran, whether it's dealing with the Paris Accords on climate change. We're not joining with the democratic nations throughout the world to promote peace. And that has to be done. Nobody trusts that we really stand for anything anymore throughout the world. And that must change, and that must happen under a new administration.
Let's hope so, sir. The majority of Cambodian people, both inside Cambodia and overseas, including your constituents, would believe that the United States would lead in terms of restoring democracy in Cambodia.
That is the issue. It's once we begin to say that our role again is to restore and to champion democracy throughout the world and to speak out, and to put our resources and to make sure our institutions like our State Department are on the ground supporting democracy. We're not doing that enough. I'm not saying we're autocratic. We're not, but we're not the champions of democracy the way we used to be, and we must again return to that.
Would you have a message, a quick message for the Cambodian Americans as to what we can do here to help our fellow, brothers, sisters back in Cambodia?
Well, first of all, I think what we're doing right now by educating the rest of the country, by talking about this, by my introducing and making press statements and introducing legislation, I think that and speaking out that Cambodian Americans, as all Americans, stand up for democracy, and we are watching peaceful dissent in Cambodia being squashed by the government, people being arrested, people being having their rights violated, or anybody who speaks out. That's a very dangerous thing that's occurring, and I think that it's really important that the country and the Cambodian Americans especially take a leadership role also in speaking up for democracy in Cambodia. And I think that will happen if we pay more attention to it and the United States again becomes a beacon of hope for democracy. But right now we're not playing a leadership role. We're playing a follower's role. And
Yes.
that has to change. And it has to change within the country. You know, we're having problems even in the United States, understanding that young people are on our streets demonstrating for change. And we have to listen to them. And the world has to listen to the young people in Cambodia and understand what they are saying, and they are the next generation of leadership, and our job is to understand them, and if they do it peacefully, to support them in any way we can.
Yes, we hope that all the activists, peaceful protesters, and opposition leaders like Kem Sokha and Samleng would be allowed to return to participate in the political life, participating in the development of
Cambodia was the great hope for democracy, and it had opposition parties, and the people were registering their rights to choose between the two parties and to see who they wanted, and the government became frightened of it and arrested the leadership and charged them with crimes, just as they're doing now, charging young people. That cannot last, you know. Autocracy works for the moment, but it can't last. It does not have the support of the people. And in Cambodia, I am sure what Hun Sen is doing does not have the support of the people. And the United States has to speak out for democracy and support, and has to tell Cambodia that we're not going to reward this bad behavior.
Yes, thank you. My producer today, Tang Sarada, would like to ask you a question, if you would bear with me for just a few more minutes.
Yes, Congressman Alan Lewentol, very fortunate to have you here on our show tonight. And I just want to have a quick question, two questions, is that do you think that China would, have more powerful than able to out America influence in Southeast Asia? So my second question, if Hun Sen successful to nominate his son to replace his position in the future or in 2023, so what is the consequence of the Hun Sen's government at that time? Do America still support the Cambodia government?
The first question is, as I understand it, was do I see China as beginning to have much more power and influence over us in Southeast Asia? Is that the question? And
that's the question.
And the second one, which I think is related, is what will
succession of power
to the transfer of power in Cambodia, with Hun Sen trying to install possibly his own son as the next leader of Cambodia when he leaves. Well, I'm a firm believer that in the short run, in the short time, autocratic, repressive regimes can work by putting their finger and controlling people, but in the long run, the will of the people and democracy and freedom will champion, will be the winner. And I think in Cambodia, the people themselves in Cambodia will not stand for Hun Sen putting in his son. Might it happen? Yes, if he has the political power for a short period of time, it could happen. But the people of Cambodia will speak out, And the United States has to support them speaking out for democracy, and I think that will happen. Now, will the Chinese have more and more influence? Unfortunately, we have left a vacuum in Southeastern Asia by not having as much U.S. presence, by not trying to promote democracy, not trying to promote trade if people are good partners, and not to stand up to the Hun Sen government, not to join with our allies. But it's going to take democratic countries standing together, all of it. The United States has to become, again, part of the world's nations that fight for democracy. It can't pull back and just be an America first. If the United States just pulls back and just looks only inward, China will have much more influence in Cambodia, and Hun Sen will be able to get away with literally imprisoning everybody who speaks out. Do I think that will last forever? No, but it would be a terrible, horrible period in Cambodia's future if that happens.
Protracted suffering.
Allow that to happen. Cambodia wants peacefully to exercise the rights that are written in its own constitution, and the young people of Cambodia will speak out and demand that. And I think that if the nations of the world stand up and support what the young people, peaceful demonstrations, Hun Sen will back off. The more there is silence, the more that we see that the world, that the United States is only looking inward and not supporting this, it will allow these bad things to happen.
Do you think, final thought, do you think that America's position in the next 4-8 years should be to support pro-democracy activists, pro-democracy groups?
It should be to support democracy. And activists are people who are expressing their democratic beliefs. It should be to support dissent. It should be to listen to people who are talking about whether you agree with them or not, and who are raising issues that the country refuses to deal with. What this has been about was young people, either through their own music, through the use of technology, YouTube, or through demonstrations on this, joining NGOs to support environmental justice and to deal with the impending disaster of the world by not dealing with climate change. If we don't listen to young people, the planet is in serious danger. And will they? I don't know. I don't know if Hun Sen will do it, but ultimately, the will of the people will prevail, but we're going through a very painful period now, and it doesn't help that the United States is looking inward rather than looking outward.
Thank you, Congressman Alan Lowenthal. Thank you so much for your time and for making the time to be on our program today. And we hope to see and speak with you again sometime in the future when you are back to Washington, D.C. Again, I apologize for starting the program a little late because of our we experienced audio problems earlier. And thank you for getting up so early in the morning to be on our program, and I appreciate that. Congressman Alan Lowenthal.
Thank you for all the work that you do. Without a free media, without a speaking out and talking to people, there can be no freedom.
Right, sir.
So I applaud what you're doing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, and I take that as a great compliment. With our limited resources, we are trying our best to convey the message to our audience.
So I cannot tell you how important it is.
Yes.
It is so important.
Yes.
That you continue to do what you're doing.
Thank you very much. Congressman Alan Lowenthal, Democrat from California, 47th District, that includes Los Angeles County and Orange County. Thank you so much and have a great day.
Thank you.
លោកអ្នកនាងមិត្តអ្នកស្ដាប់នឹងទស្សនាកម្មវិធីជាទីមេត្រីអំបញ្ញមិញនេះជាកិច្ចសម្ភាសជាមួយអ្នកតំណាងរាស្ត្រខាងគណៈបកប្រជាធិបតេយ្យមណ្ឌលទី47នៅរដ្ឋ California ក្នុងស្រុក2ស្រុក Los Angeles និងស្រុក Orange County ដែលរួមមានបញ្ចូលទីក្រុង Long Beach ដែល Anaheim និងក្រុងផ្សេងៗទៀតដែលមានប្រជាពលរដ្ឋខ្មែររស់នៅជាច្រើននៅទីនោះបាទហើយអំបញ្ញមិញលោកមានប្រសាសន៍បន្ទាប់ពីលោកបានចេញសេចក្តីប្រកាសព័ត៌មានមួយអំពីស្ថានភាពដែលកើតមាននៅក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជាក្រោមការគ្រប់គ្រងរបស់លោកនាយករដ្ឋមន្ត្រីហ៊ុនសែនជាពិសេសថ្មីប្រមាណសប្តាហ៍មកនេះការចាប់ខ្លួនឃុំខ្លួនសកម្មជនបរិស្ថានយុវជនសកម្មជនមេដាធម្មជាតិនិងអ្នកសកម្មជនដទៃទៀតបាទដាក់ពន្ធនាគារនេះជាការគៀបសង្កត់មួយខាងសិទ្ធិសេរីភាពជាការប្រឆាំងនឹងរដ្ឋធម្មនុញ្ញលោកមានប្រសាសន៍ថាជាការប្រឆាំងនឹងរដ្ឋធម្មនុញ្ញរបស់ខ្លួនឯងច្បាប់កម្ពុជារបស់ប្រទេសខ្លួនឯងពីរយៈអាជ្ញាធរមានសមត្ថកិច្ចក្រោមការដឹកនាំរបស់លោកនាយករដ្ឋមន្ត្រីហ៊ុនសែនលោកថាសំខាន់បំផុតគឺជាទីមួយត្រូវផ្សព្វផ្សាយឲ្យពិភពលោកបានជ្រាបថារបបគ្រប់គ្រងក្រុងភ្នំពេញក្រោមការដឹកនាំរបស់លោកហ៊ុនសែនគឺជារបបដែលដឹកនាំហៅថាបែបអូតូក្រាស៊ីគឺរបបផ្ដាច់ការនិយាយមិនបានសូម្បីតែធ្វើស្របទៅតាមរដ្ឋធម្មនុញ្ញរបស់ខ្លួនច្បាប់របស់ខ្លួនក៏ធ្វើមិនបានការតវ៉ាបាតុកម្មអហិង្សាធ្វើអ្វីក៏មិនបានដែរបាទហើយលោកថារបបផ្ដាច់ការដែលប្រើអំណាចគៀបសង្កត់នឹងអាចរស់បានមួយរយៈតែมันបានរហូតទេពីព្រោះប្រឆាំងនឹងឆន្ទៈរបស់ប្រជាពលរដ្ឋភាគច្រើនបាទប្រជាពលរដ្ឋត្រូវការសិទ្ធិសេរីភាពហើយការបញ្ចេញមតិទាមទារសិទ្ធិសេរីភាពគឺមានចែងនៅក្នុងរដ្ឋធម្មនុញ្ញរបស់ខ្លួនហើយប្រទេសកម្ពុជាក៏បានចុះហត្ថលេខានៅក្នុងច្បាប់អន្តរជាតិជាច្រើនទៀតដែរមានទាំងពីសន្ធិសញ្ញាស្ដីអំពីសិទ្ធិមនុស្សសិទ្ធិធ្វើនយោបាយផ្សេងៗបាទហើយលោកសង្ឃឹមខ្ញុំសូមសង្ខេបថាសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកក៏មានចំណុចខ្សោយខ្លះដែរក្នុងរយៈពេលប្រហែលឆ្នាំនេះព្រោះទី1មានបញ្ហាផ្ទាល់ខ្លួននៅក្នុងសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកទី2សហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកក្រោមការដឹកនាំរបស់អ្នកដឹកនាំខ្លះនោះគឺមិនបានដើរឈានមុខនាំមុខក្នុងការគ្រប់គ្រងសម្លេងប្រជាធិបតេយ្យសម្លេងអ្នកទាមទារប្រជាធិបតេយ្យទាមទារសិទ្ធិសេរីភាពបែរជាដើរក្រោយទៅវិញរងចាំមើលប្រទេសដទៃធ្វើយ៉ាងម៉េចបានខ្លួនធ្វើតាមលោកថាជាការខុសឆ្គងមួយសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកគួរតែនាំមុខហើយលោកសង្ឃឹមថារដ្ឋបាលរដ្ឋការសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិករដ្ឋាភិបាលសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកអាណត្តិក្រោយនឹងមានការប្រែប្រួលហើយចំពោះលោកសង្ឃឹមថាបើសិនណាជាបេក្ខជនខាងគណៈបករបស់លោកបកប្រជាធិបតេយ្យជាប់ឆ្នោតដឹកនាំប្រទេសលោកសង្ឃឹមថានឹងមានការប្រែប្រួលទណ្ឌកម្មនឹងមានជាបន្តទៅមុខទៀតតាមរូបភាពផ្សេងទៅលើរបៀបគ្រប់គ្រងរបស់រដ្ឋាភិបាលលោកហ៊ុនសែនហើយបន្ទាប់មកចុងក្រោយគឺថាតើលោកហ៊ុនសែននឹងអាចផ្ទេរតំណែងទៅឲ្យកូនរបស់លោកកូនប្រុសរបស់លោកឧត្តមសេនីយ៍ឯកហ៊ុនម៉ាណែតយ៉ាងម៉េចយ៉ាងណានោះលោកថាបើសិនជាលោកហ៊ុនសែននៅមានអំណាចផ្ដាច់មុខដូចសពថ្ងៃគឺថាលោកអាចធ្វើបានក៏ប៉ុន្តែសុទ្ធតែជារឿងផ្ទុយនឹងឆន្ទៈរបស់មនុស្សជាច្រើននៅក្នុងប្រទេសកម្ពុជារួមទាំងគណៈបករបស់គាត់ផ្ទាល់ផងគណៈបកប្រជាជនពោះជារឿងដើរបញ្ច្រាស់ទិសហើយលោកថាទាំងអស់គឺសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកនឹងនៅបន្តគ្រប់គ្រងតទៅទៀតចង់ឃើញជាពិសេសការលើកស្ទួយសម្លេងក្រមយុវជនលោកនៅក្នុងសេចក្តីប្រកាសព័ត៌មានរបស់លោកតំណាងរាស្ត្រ Alan Lowenthal លោកថាលោកហ៊ុនសែនភ័យខ្លាចសម្លេងយុវជនចំនួនក្រោយដែលថាទាមទារព្រោះកម្លាំងយុវជនចំនួនក្រោយនេះខុសពីការគិតរបស់លោកយុវជនចំនួនក្រោយនឹងបន្តធ្វើដំណើរបានវែងឆ្ងាយទៅមុខទៀតហើយមិនត្រូវទៅគៀបសង្កត់សម្លេងសូម្បីតែតាំងពីចម្រៀងច្រៀងស្នេហាជាតិរាំបទរ៉ាប់បទស្អីបន្តិចបន្តួចក៏ទៅចាប់គេដែរហេតុអ្វីបានជាចេះតែចាត់ទុកថាជារឿងការធ្វើបដិវត្តប៉ុនប៉ងរំលំរបបរបស់លោកហ៊ុនសែននោះគ្រាន់តែជារឿងច្រៀងចម្រៀងគ្រាន់តែទៅទាមទារសូមឲ្យមានការកុំកាប់ព្រៃឈើបំផ្លាញធនធានធម្មជាតិរបស់ខ្លួន ហួសហេតុពេកនោះវាទៅជាមានទោសទៅវិញបាទសរុបទាំងអស់មកលោក Alan Lowenthal ជាតំណាងរាស្ត្រសកម្មមួយរូបលោកឧស្សាហ៍ធ្វើសេចក្តីស្នើសេចក្តីសម្រេចចិត្តនៅក្នុងសភាហៅថា resolution ក្នុងរឿងខ្មែរប៉ុន្តែនៅក្នុងសភាសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកខាងសភាតំណាងរាស្ត្រមានសមាជិកដល់ទៅ435នាក់ដូច្នេះជាការពិបាកដែរដើម្បីនឹងធ្វើច្បាប់អ្វីមួយគឺតម្រូវឲ្យស្ថានភាពនៅក្នុងរឿងមួយហ្នឹងមានទម្ងន់ធ្ងន់ធ្ងរទើបសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកចាត់វិធានការមុនគេបើថានៅជាមធ្យមទេក៏គេធ្វើទៅតាមមធ្យមក៏ទោះជាយ៉ាងណាក៏ដោយលោក Alan Lowenthal បន្ទោសក្រសួងការបរទេសសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកដែរដែលមិនសូវជាចាត់វិធានការតឹងតែងក្នុងនាមរដ្ឋាភិបាលសប្តាហ៍ថ្ងៃហ្នឹងដាក់ទណ្ឌកម្មក្រុមប្រាច់ការក្រុមរំលោភសិទ្ធិមនុស្សធំនៅក្នុងលោកទើបនៅនឹងចាប់ផ្ដើមថ្មីនេះដូចជារឿងដាក់ទណ្ឌកម្មលើក្រុមហ៊ុនចិន UDG ដែលធ្វើការអភិវឌ្ឍដល់ធំធេងនៅខេត្តកោះកុងនោះបាទហើយក៏មិនមែនតែជារឿងខ្មែរសុទ្ធសាធដែរវាទាក់ទិននឹងរឿងគេហៅថានយោបាយភូមិសាស្ត្រអីផ្សេងទៀតផងបាទលោក Alan Lowenthal បានបន្តចង់បញ្ចប់ថានឹងជួយប្រជាពលរដ្ឋខ្មែរយើងនឹងអ្នកដែលស្នេហាលទ្ធិប្រជាធិបតេយ្យសិទ្ធិសេរីភាពនឹងបាទតទៅមុខទៀតខ្ញុំសូមសង្ខេបសេចក្តីបញ្ជាក់ពីការសន្ទនាការសាកសួរសភាជាមួយនឹង